This is to our program tonight. This is under the auspices of the Education Committee and the Environmental Committee under that. So I want to invite Debbie. Do you want to welcome everybody and give some opening remarks?
I do. I greeted everyone personally when you all came on. It's wonderful to see you. I'm not surprised that many of you are here with us because this is such an important topic, and we want to thank Limor and Corinne for the work they do under the committee, and Carol for all your help with reverse Tashlich. And it's something that Women's League has had many resolutions on related to over the years, and it's something that we are continually interested in. As I just mentioned about bringing batteries to convention, it's something that we're always thinking about, how we can maintain the earth and sustain what God has given us. So I welcome you tonight, and I want to thank again Limor and Corinne for what they're doing tonight, and Carol.
Carol is going to present us with the Dvar Torah tonight.
Okay, well, thank you, Limor. So this is a little bit about Judaism and water, since we'll be hearing about water in a few minutes. So human beings depend on a sufficient supply of high quality fresh water for their survival. Because of this essential dependence, Jewish sources equate water with life. The biblical experiences with water in the desert can be understood as a spiritual training to cultivate an appreciation for God's goodness. Jewish prayers and texts reinforce this message and remind us of pure ancient wisdom about the preciousness of water. Today, the industrialization of water distribution has increased the availability of water, yet reduced our appreciation for its importance. For our modern use of water to continue in the long term, we will have to develop a deeper water awareness. By recognizing our dependence on water and ultimately our dependence on God, we can strengthen our appreciation and protection of our precious natural resources, and also reap the spiritual benefits of a strengthened relationship with the Creator of the world. The source for this was Rabbi Yonatan Nirel, and he has a website, which was jewishecoseminars.com. I'll put it in the chat. /water, appreciating a limited resource. And as I said, I'll put that in the chat. Thank you, Limor.
Okay, now I'd like to call on Corinne Hammerschlag, my co-chair, to introduce our very important speaker this evening, very special speaker.
Well, when I was asked to introduce Neil, I was a little reluctant because, I'm not prejudiced at all, as you can imagine. So I said that I would keep it short and sweet and maybe funny. So just a little bit about Neil. He was always loved water and swimming, and was always a strong swimmer. And at the age of 5 or 6, strapped an empty liter Coke bottle on his back and swam around like a scuba diver's diving tank. So it was something he'd always wanted to do, and always hang around the divers at any of the holidays when we went. And the love of sharks, I'm not sure. I always say, for a nice Jewish boy, you should be studying goldfish and your mother would be much happier. But in any event, that's all good. And quite interestingly enough, he did do his undergraduate at University of Toronto, because he was born in South Africa, and then we came to Toronto, and we weren't sure what he was going to do, because he had an undergraduate BSc, and we thought maybe he'll be a doctor, which he is, but a different kind, or something like that. And we ended up that he swims with sharks and studies them. But for me, the funny thing is, I was sitting in a sisterhood meeting one night, and all the Jewish mothers were boasting, what their little darling does and what their child does. And the one woman said, I think we should have just a little competition. Whose child does the most unusual thing? So the one says, I'm going to win. my son is a ski instructor. That's very unusual. I said, oh, no, nobody beats me. My son swims with sharks, examines them, does biopsies on them, loves the water. I said, I think I won. And I always tell him, I'm really happy that I don't know everything he does, because I probably wouldn't sleep at night. Anyway, so that is a brief introduction. Obviously, I'm very proud of him. He has made a tremendous name for himself. He's world renowned. He's been on Discovery Channel. He's been on National Geographic as the expert scientist. So as I say, slightly proud of him, and really looking forward to hearing what he's got to say about the environment and water and sharks and fish. And just a word of warning, never go to a restaurant with Neil and order fish, because you'll get a lecture of what's sustainable, what's not sustainable, what's a bottom feeder, what's a top feeder. Just a word of advice. In any event, I now, with great pleasure, hand it over to Neil.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, can I share my screen if you can give me access to share my screen? Thanks, Mom. That was an excellent introduction. Definitely also, I'd say one of the most unique introductions I've ever got. It's not the same I've had at any of my scientific seminars. So can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. So I think my talk today is going to be a little bit different than probably what you've heard and what you might be expecting. I'm a marine biologist, and my specialty is in the behavioral ecology of sharks. So, I study marine science and have led courses. I've taught courses in marine conservation, ocean conservation. And today I'm going to talk about the need and importance of conserving our oceans, lakes, and rivers in a changing world. But I'm going to focus in on what I know best, which is sharks. And I'm going to try and make the case that sharks are really sentinels for ecosystem change. And they can actually serve as kind of like a canary in the coal mine and provide us with a lot of information. And, the topic, obviously, conserving oceans, lakes, and rivers in a changing world is I could never cover in 40 minutes, let alone, a year. So I'm going to try to condense it down with using some examples, particularly of sharks as sentinels, and then discuss some specific research I'm involved with, so you can kind of get a sense of some of the scientific ways we're addressing problems and conservation needs of the ocean. And then I'll, really try to not talk too long so we can open up for questions, because I think that might be the most fun we can have here and best value of all of our time together. So I'm going to start, I guess I'll start this talk here with just telling you a little bit of background about me. So I have a lovely wife, Caroline, and two boys, 10 and 5, Noah Mako and Ben Ocean, and my two dogs, Crosby Blue and Tasha Thresher. As my mom mentioned, and probably can tell from her accent, I was born in South Africa, and that's really where my love of the ocean and water developed. I went on holidays, we went to vacation off of Durban and off of Cape Town, where I got the opportunity to see the ocean and spend time in the ocean, really developed my passion. But when I was 7, my family moved to Canada, which was landlocked at the time, but from the ocean, but not from the lakes and rivers. So I still got to enjoy that growing up. But my passion was for the ocean. And so I moved to, after doing my bachelor's of science at the University of Toronto, moved to Florida, to Fort Lauderdale to do my master's. I then did my PhD. And then I worked for 13 years as a professor at the University of Miami. And then I actually am coming back to Canada within the end of this year to like fully live in Nova Scotia, Canada. So coming on the east coast of Canada to address and fill gaps in our knowledge about ocean conservation off of Canada. So I'm really excited about kind of this new adventure. So that's just kind of some context about who I am and where I'm from and how I got here. And so I kind of wanted to start, a little bit broader and kind of think about to us, like, just pose a question in your mind is what comes to mind when you think about a river? So if I say picture a river, what do you think of? So I think some of us might think of something like this, depending on where we're from. I think depending on what we like to do in our pastime and how we picture river, some of us might think of something like this. These beautiful myths coming over the river. And if I said, what about an ocean? I think some of us, might picture this and think about our holidays, right? So if I say, and I think a lot of people, this is the way they like to enjoy the ocean from the beach and just looking at its beauty and listening to its sound. I know that I like to fall asleep to the sound of rolling waves in the ocean. And I hope many of you will get to see this in a few weeks, taking a vacation to the ocean. Some of us, however, when you hear the word ocean, they might think of something like this, like the vibrant coral reef and all the different species. And the coral reefs are actually the most biodiverse ecosystem in the world. There's more species diversity in a coral reef than there is in a tropical rainforest. What about if I say the word a lake? What comes to mind? So if I say lake, what do you think of? Some of you might think of this, right? You might think of cottage country and getting to enjoy having a coffee out on the dock by cottage, or going water skiing, or just taking in the beauty, the sounds, or just spending the afternoon, maybe going for a canoe ride, or maybe some of us remember going to camp. Those of us who went to camp and spending summers out at a lake. I think when I say the word, ocean or lake or river, very few of us might picture this. But this is probably more common than of what a river looks like. It's a river in Ghana, or something like this when I say ocean. This is how these are millions of fish at a fish market. Or what about when I say ocean, you probably don't picture something like this. Trash on the beach. When I say the word, ocean, you probably don't think about huge fishing fleets, or the waters being covered with boats that are huge nets that are hauling in millions and millions and millions of fish. When you think about lakes, you probably aren't thinking about plastic pollution that's super thick, that where cuts off air to the water. So our oceans, our lakes and rivers are really threatened by, and you've seen some of the biggest ones. Certainly, our oceans, lakes, and rivers are now facing a lot of different threats. Some are more obvious, some are less obvious. I think some of the most obvious are what we see, and that things like the garbage that's left along the shoreline or washes up on the shoreline, particularly as it relates to plastics. So plastics, not only the plastics themselves will physically pollute the water, and the issues with that is organisms can swallow plastic. Plastic easily breaks down into tiny little pieces that then can be ingested by animals, and that ingestion of plastic can block their digestive tract, and then they will essentially die of starvation. But plastic also, a problem with plastic is that it also causes, it has a surface to which there's a lot of chemicals that like to attach themselves to. So as a result of these chemicals, that not only chemicals from the plastic itself, but chemicals from the environment that stick to the plastic, They can be, if fish eat them or animals eat a little piece of plastic, they can absorb these toxins, these chemicals into their tissues that can cause all types of problems to their body, to their physiology, to their health, to their reproduction. Climate change and ocean warming is a huge new threat, relatively new threat. But how climate impacts species in the oceans is much more difficult to understand because of the time scale and the magnitude at which it occurs, and some other reasons. But warming oceans is a problem, and that is because all species that are, each individual species will their metabolism is most effective at a certain range of temperatures, and anything below it or above that temperature range is suboptimal to their health and to the way their body functions. And if those temperatures are way too low or way too high, it can cause not only bodily function failure, but death. So these animals either need to move to a better place, better temperatures, or if they stay, they might risk dying or being impaired in terms of behavior and body function. But again, this is a somewhat slow impact that we really don't understand what the effects are very broadly. The other issue with climate change is ocean warming is causing, in addition to that, climate change is causing oceans to become more acidic. That's because increased CO2 into the atmosphere, increase burning of fossil fuels, increase CO2 in the air. What happens is that carbon in the CO2 gets absorbed into the ocean. The ocean is the biggest sink of carbon. And what happens, the ocean absorbs the CO2 that comes from the combustion of fossil fuels, and that CO2 gets absorbed into the ocean and separates out that CO2, and there's a chemical reaction that essentially reduces the pH of the ocean water, makes the ocean more acidic. And the oceans are slowly becoming more acidic. And this is a problem because most of like corals, the coral skeleton is made up of calcium carbonate, and that is like a limestone, and that dissolves in acidic waters. And so it's harder for coral reefs to form. In addition, think all the mollusks, the shells and everything like that, the sea stars, they're also skeleton and shells are made of calcium carbonate. And so those are becoming harder to form. And what we're seeing is actually some shells are actually becoming weaker. And so there's a lot of different effects, and some of which we know and some which we don't know. Obviously, overfishing is very obvious, and overfishing, some species can reproduce relatively quickly. So they are, they can be removed at a rate at which they can replenish themselves. And certainly smaller species of fish that live lower in the food web tend to be faster growing, faster reproducing, and they can replace themselves pretty quickly. But large fish and marine mammals are slow growing, late maturing, and they have relatively few young. So large industrial scale fishing for those species can have very big impacts because the species cannot reproduce fast enough to replenish themselves from being removed. And some species are being are being targeted, are being killed intentionally in fishing, but some species are being killed and are being wiped out to extinction as a result of unintentional catch, what's called bycatch. Bycatch is where there's a fishing is targeting one thing and it's causing the decline of something else. And so, for example, I don't know if you've heard of the vaquita dolphin, but it's the most endangered marine mammal in the world. There's like 10 of these species left that are being caught off Mexico. But their population is not dwindled to just 10 individuals left in the species because they're being intentionally caught. They're being unintentionally caught in nets that are targeting this other fish. So there's this other fish that's a big delicacy. but they use big nets to catch this other fish, and as a result, these big nets catch these dolphins, and these dolphins die in the nets. So again, this is an example of species being fished to extinction, but unintentionally. So there's a lot of different threats facing our oceans and lakes and rivers, particularly climate change, pollution, habitat degradation, and overfishing. So how do we study these things, and what does it mean? And so I'm going to introduce you to kind of the protagonist of my story, and that is the sharks. And I think sharks are really sentinels for understanding ecosystem change and are sentinels for conservation. And there's several reasons why. And the first is that I think one thing about sharks is that they are really late maturing. So some sharks, like the great white shark that you obviously have heard of, will only reach sexual maturity at 26 years of age. That means that it takes 26 years to even reproduce. Most sharks become reproductively active in their teenage years, so they have to survive until then to give birth. They grow very slowly. They produce very few young. Many sharks, like I said, will only reach sexual maturity in their teenage years, and then they reproduce every 2 to 3 years, and sometimes they'll have between 2 and 20 young. Now, that's not a lot when you consider like a bony fish, like many of the bony fish that we might eat, might reach sexual maturity, able to reproduce after a year of life. And then they'll reproduce every year, and they might have millions and millions and millions of eggs every year, versus a shark, which takes 15 years to reproduce in some cases, and then only gives birth every 2 to 3 years. So they're very vulnerable in that sense, to overfishing or climate change or pollution, because they can't replenish themselves very quickly. The other thing about these animals that makes them really good sentinels is that for understanding these impacts, is that they live at the top of the food web. So we can't study everything everything in the whole food web. That's too big, it's too broad. But if you think about it, they live at the top of the food web, so they integrate information from throughout the food web. So if they act kind of again like that canary in the coal mine, because if something's wrong at the bottom of the food web, it will work its way to the top of the food web. We might not know what's going on at the bottom of the food web, but essentially the sharks are consuming throughout the food chain. And so if there's any imbalances, we might see that in the sharks, be able to detect in the sharks. And then the other thing is these sharks move very large distances. So they move over very large areas, and therefore exposed to threats over their range, which also presents some problems because they move over very large areas. So I guess the big question is, think about, well, how would you conserve a species that's very low to, has this slow reproductive output, moves very great distances, and is wide ranging? That presents some problems. I know on land, if you think about highly migratory animals, let's take giraffes as an example. Some of the ways we can conserve these animals is by protecting really important spots for them. One of the ways we've been successful as humankind to protect these animals is to find out where the migration routes are. Where are the places that they are really special to them? Where are the places that they might aggregate to feed? Where are the places that they might be, the pregnant moms might be using as a gestation ground? Where are the areas where they might be giving birth? You can imagine that you can't protect the entire Serengeti, but at least protect places. You can imagine that the very valuable thing for conservation would be to protect areas that these animals might be aggregating for reproduction, right? That's not an area, that's an area to protect. So when it comes to conservation of highly migratory species, some of the things we can try to do to be successful does not protect everywhere they go, because we can't do that, but we can protect these critical areas, smaller places that are disproportionately more important to these animals, areas like these birthing grounds or gestation grounds or feeding grounds. So on land, we can fly a helicopter and follow these animals and see where they go and see where these mating grounds are, feeding grounds are, where the water holes are, when they're giving birth. In the ocean, it's a lot bigger challenge. You can't just fly a helicopter and say, okay, tell me where the sharks are. Where are they giving birth? Where's the gestation grounds? Everything that's happening in the ocean is invisible. In our lakes, in our rivers, and in our oceans, there's an invisibility cloak over it. So that presents a massive, massive challenge to conserving our waterways. The fact that they are concealed under the surface of the ocean, and satellites can't. Satellite imagery, as good as it is, as good as Google Earth is, you know, think about when you view Google Earth, right? You can go and use Google Earth, and you can go and check out a house, you can check out an address, you can go street view, you can see exactly what's there. You go over the ocean, it's blue, there's nothing there. You can zoom in, street view, there's nothing. You can't see what happens. Satellites can't see under the ocean. That's a huge, huge monumental challenge. So what can we do? How do we conserve highly migratory species, these sentinels of change? Well, one of the things we can use is new technology, and technology is helping us. And so this is a quick clip I'm going to show you from shot of my team by Discovery Channel when we were trying to study tiger sharks. So this big apex predator, wide-ranging apex predator, and we would need to catch them and deploy satellite tags on them, and it's a way to track these animals. So we play this video, and basically our team will secure these sharks. And fortunately, this looks kind of rough, but we're skilled, and we're putting a pump in the shark's mouth. They'll pump water with gills, and then attaching a satellite tag to its fin, and then we release it, and that shark will track, and we can see where it goes. You guys can see this video, right? Yeah, okay, good. We're just making sure. So we can then follow these sharks along, and that's really incredible technology, because now we can start getting an idea of where these animals are going when, right? And where are they going? And it's kind of giving us opportunities to see behind the invisibility cloak of the ocean. So here's some of the tracks that you'll see. So what you're looking at now is tracks of about 60 tiger sharks that have satellite tagged. The blue tracks are in the winter, the orange tracks are in the summer, but these are where these sharks are actually going. You can see they're making huge movements. They're swimming around. They're really busy. They're making huge movements, which is really incredible to learn actually where these animals go, because we've never been able to do that before. But you know, these are still lots of dots, and the question now is, what we have to do is take this information of where they go, and we know we can't protect everywhere they go. So what we have to do is figure out where the most important places are for these animals, and I figured out some of those places. And one thing that was really unique to us was so this is Miami, where you see here, but these islands are the Bahamas. And off the northwestern edge, there's this area that's nicknamed Tiger Beach. And it's nicknamed that because of the lots of tiger sharks that are there. But what we found through our satellite tracking is that these sharks were spending a really large amount of time in this really shallow, warm patch of sand off the northwest Bahamas. Really, really strange. And we've wondered, like, what could be going on, why they were spending so much time there. And if you go there and you drive a boat up, you can see it's packed with these big tiger sharks. But what's really unique about this area is that these tiger sharks are all large females. So that led me to believe that this area, the importance of the area, be related to reproduction. But how do you tell that in a tiger shark? How can you tell what its reproductive mode is, or if it's pregnant or not? Well, historically, the way you would do that is to capture these sharks, cut them open, and see, what part of their reproductive cycle are they in? Are they barren? Do they have babies? Are they, the babies far along? Or, what are they even mature? Are they immature? Now, for someone who wants to conserve sharks, we weren't going to kill them and cut them up and look inside and look to see if, So we had to come up with new technology. And for that, we came up, with an idea. I mean, you can't just take a tiger shark to do, to the OBGYN and do a test. So what we decided to do is actually bring the test to the sharks in the field. So what we did is we got this portable ultrasound. So this is a waterproof portable ultrasound This is my colleague, James Dulakowski, and this is an ultrasound that he's holding. This is the ultrasound our student is holding. This is the probe. There are special glasses, which we can see exactly what the probe is seeing. And we scan the belly of the sharks to see, are they pregnant? Are they not? Are they even mature or not? And it's a way to do it without having to kill them. And so this is what is an example of what you see. So this is doing the ultrasound, swiping it along the belly. And if you look in, we can actually see that these sharks are pregnant. And some of these sharks had up to 20 different babies, which is pretty incredible. And so what we were able to do is identify that these sharks were in fact pregnant. About 50% of them were pregnant. And we were able to identify, this is the ultrasound again, in the womb, these pups. And some of these sharks had 20 pups. And so this was really amazing because now we could track these pregnant females and identify where they're going. And we actually discovered a gestation ground for these tiger sharks. And that provides an avenue of figuring out, these important places and how to protect them. And fortunately, my colleagues and many others are tracking sharks and other species, but this is related to sharks. And this is what I'm going to show you now is tracks from 23 different species across the globe, over 1,600 different sharks that my colleagues and I track globally from 23 species. And you can see where they're moving all around. And so we can take globally, start now finding these hotspots, globally finding hotspots for these threatened species. And once you look at all these data, we can start looking at where these animals are spending most of their time, and not only and where different individuals from different species spend a lot of their time. And we can create a global map. And what you're looking at here is a heat map. And what that means is warmer colors are more important areas for sharks of multiple different species, and more green, blue colors are less important areas. So what we can start doing is finding areas globally that are important to not just one species, but lots of species. And we can then ask questions like, are these areas protected? Are they not protected? So remember, we went from completely invisible ocean to identifying for 23 different species across the globe where are important areas for all these different species. And then what we can do, can ask questions like, well, are those areas under risk of overfishing? So in the open ocean, the biggest type of fishing, the biggest threat in terms of fishing gear is called a long line. A long line is called that because boats will deploy this long line, a line that might be 25 to 50 miles long that floats to the surface. And every few feet, there's a dangling hook, okay, with meat. And it catches anything that will eat that meat. So seals, sharks, tunas, dolphins, turtles, birds. But this is the biggest threat to sharks for sure. And so what we did is we got some really interesting data. These boats above a certain size are required to carry something on their vessel called AIS. And what AIS is, it's like a satellite tag for the boat. It transmits the location of boats so that it's kind of like air traffic control for fishing boats. So that way they can be tracked in the open ocean. They can be made sure that they're not being captured by pirates, that these boats aren't bashing into one another, they don't get lost in the Bermuda Triangle or anything like that. But if you get those data, you can actually identify hotspots of where these fishing activities are occurring. So what we did is we got these data globally and found hotspots of where fishing is occurring. And this is a heat map as well. The redder the color means areas that are under higher fishing intensity. And then what we can do is we can overlap them with our shark tracking data hotspots. So what you're looking at here is a heat map, again, global heat map of areas that are both a hotspot for sharks, areas that are really important for sharks, where they're spending most of their time, but also areas that are heavily fished. Now, the it goes from like red to white hot. The more whiter, the yellower the color, these are actually areas where there's higher overlap between these commercial longline fishings and sharks. And these blue dots are places where our satellite tag sharks were actually captured and killed by fishing vessels. And as you would expect, areas where these sharks were caught and killed these blue dots were areas where there was the highest fishing effort, and also areas where we saw that were the most important for sharks. Now, this is really important because these data allow us to estimate the risk of being killed in the open ocean by these sharks, so we can get an idea of where their greatest risk is. And as upsetting that is, it also provides an avenue to conserve them. It provides us an idea of where we need to protect them and which species need the most protection. Species that overlap the most with the fishing vessels might need more protection than others. So it provides an avenue for conserving these open ocean species, these sentinels. So what about climate change? Well, I'm gonna near the end of my talk here with a video of a study that I did, and I think this video kind of summarizes it better than some slides could. So it's a video of our research on tiger sharks, bring it back to tiger sharks. Now, again, remember the effects of ocean warming and climate change on species in the ocean is very hard to detect, very hard to detect. So we know very little about it, but this is one of the few studies that have actually been able to identify climate impacts on the impacts of ocean warming on marine predators. So I'm going to play this video, and I'm going to actually maybe play it from here outside my presentation because it might be better. So hold on a second. So I'm going to stop this share and I'm going to do a new share. Can you guys see my media player? Yeah? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to play that and let me know if you can hear it. There's going to be sound, all right? So I'm going to put it up all the way.
We're not getting sound. Did you set the Zoom for sound?
No, I didn't know I have to do that.
Yeah, so before you share your screen,
Yeah.
when you're at the share screen in the lower left corner, you need to click on for video and audio.
Okay, 1 second.
Sure.
So say that again. So I go.
So when you go to share screen in
Yeah.
the lower left-hand corner.
Got it. I've never knew that. Wow. Thank you for teaching me that.
Sure.
That is exciting. Okay. So I'm going to try share this now. Can you see the video?
Not yet.
Hold on. Let me stop the share. Let me share this. Hold on. Well, let me try play it in my presentation. Maybe that's the way to do it. Okay.
Large sharks are important to healthy oceans, but climate change may be threatening these apex predators and their ecosystems. In tropical seas, the largest predator is the tiger shark. As the waters continue to warm in the western North Atlantic Ocean, we wanted to know what it means for tiger sharks. Has ocean warming altered their distributions over time? Has it changed where they move and when they migrate? Studying this was logistically challenging. I mean, we couldn't just go out there and observe the sharks. They were hidden under the invisibility cloak of the ocean. So we had to use an innovative, diverse, and collaborative approach with various methods. By tracking tiger sharks via satellite, analyzing nearly 40 years of tagging data, and applying statistical modeling to this information, we were able to evaluate just how ocean warming has impacted tiger shark movements. Our study revealed that over the past 40 years, tiger shark distributions have extended further poleward along with warming waters. In fact, off the northeast United States, where it was historically way too cold for tiger sharks, these waters have now warmed to suitable levels for tiger sharks, and they've moved into those areas. Our research has also revealed climate-driven changes to tiger shark migrations. Their annual migrations have extended farther north and also occurred earlier in the year as a result of warming. The last decade saw the hottest ocean temperatures ever recorded. During the warmest months, for every 1 degree Celsius increase in water temperatures above the long-term average, tiger sharks have moved poleward by nearly 4 degrees latitude and also migrated about 14 days earlier to waters off the northeast US. Most importantly, we discovered that ocean warming has caused tiger sharks to shift their movements outside of areas that were previously providing them with protection from commercial fishing. As a result, they have become more vulnerable to commercial fishing. Understanding these climate-driven changes to tiger shark movements is important, as it could disrupt natural predator-prey interactions, which could lead to ecological imbalances in the ocean. Not to mention, changes to where these predators go could have ramifications for human safety. So by moving into new locations, this could potentially increase encounter rates between tiger sharks and humans using the ocean. As the climate continues to change, it will be critical to understand and predict the impacts of ocean warming on the movements, ecosystem effects, and conservation of tiger sharks, as well as other apex predators.
All right. Oh, all right. So where does that leave us? So I wanted to now bring it back to kind of why we're getting together and the idea of Tikkun Olam. And I think, knowing that there's threats facing the oceans and lakes and waterways and rivers, we really need to think that what can we do? And I think, traditionally, Tikkun Olam has been thought of as, helping each other, helping the Jewish community, helping repair the world from a human perspective, humans helping humans. But I think about it as literally repairing the world itself, the land, the sea, the ocean, the planet, the environment. And I think, it makes sense because in order to be healthy as people, I think in order to be a healthy and productive society, we need to have a healthy and productive environment. And the one is needed for the other. If there are no resources there's no fish in the sea for us to eat, then how are we supposed to feed the hungry? And I think we need to think of, and that's a really important part of Judaism, is I think if we need to take care of humans and others in our communities, we need to take care of the environment. So I just wanted to end up with talking about things that the individual person can do to help conserve our waterways. And I think first and foremost, we can always support conservation organizations, right? We can support those groups that are knowledgeable, that are doing work to help preserve the oceans, the lakes, the rivers. Use less plastic. I mean, plastic, no matter what is going to happen, it's going to end up in the ocean, no matter where you live, or in our rivers and in our lakes. So it's important that we use less of it and try to reuse it and recycle. Have beach cleanups, river cleanups. The reverse touch leak that you guys have been doing has been excellent. In terms of making choices about what to eat, certainly eating more plant-based foods and eating more lower in the food web, and eating sustainably. And it's sometimes hard to know what to eat sustainable, but Monterey Bay provides a seafood watch. Monterey Bay, if you Google Monterey Bay Seafood Watch, they have a website. They also have a card that tells you about, what fishes are sustainable or not to eat. But in general, you want to eat the most sustainable fish are ones that, kind of feed lowest in the food web, the fish that are vegetarian, if you will. And then obviously super important is to educate yourself and educate others. I think that most conservation, the most impactful conservation is going to happen when people just talk to one another at the dinner table, just hanging out at with friends, telling them about the things that you've learned, making other people aware. And then a huge power that everyone has, really, a huge power is obviously who we vote for. And we can vote for people in power that can actually make huge changes that are more environmentally friendly. So I think one thing that, we can do is vote for people who are going to take care of the planet. That's a huge, huge responsibility that we have and a huge opportunity we have to conserve our planet. And so with that, I'll open it up to questions. And if you want to get in touch, here is my email. And then also you can find me on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook at Dr. Neil Hammer. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions or chat more. So thanks.
So before we take a couple questions, we'll give you a little breather here, maybe 3 minutes. I wanted to share a couple of words of Torah. I know that we've spoken in the past about God giving us the land, right? And we've talked about that in our in Bereshit. God says, here is the land and you are to take care of it. But what about the water, right? So let me give you a little Torah here. There we go. Psalm 104 is something we say every day. If you look at the first 2 stanzas, which I've separated there, those are the 2 stanzas that we actually say when we wrap ourselves, before we wrap our talit on ourselves, right? So that's how we start our day. And we're basically saying, thank you, God, for all the things that you've created. And if you look at the last they're almost at the end of Psalm 104, but I chose these stanzas specifically. How many are the things you have made, O Lord? You have made them with wisdom. The earth is full of your creations. There is this, and the first thing that they mention is there is the sea vast and wide, with its creatures beyond number, living things small and great. So something to ponder as you're getting all your questions ready, but I just want you to ponder, why is that the first thing that we talk about when we talk about all of the things that Hashem has made for us? And the first thing they mention is the sea and all the creatures in the sea. And I think that pairing that with the first 2 stanzas, with the first 2 psukim, the first 2 sentences, saying that we are going to thank God for all of the things that Hashem's created, and we're wrapping this around our bodies, I think really clues us into the fact that not only does Hashem want us to take care of the earth, but he really wants us to take care of the sea and all of the animals in the sea. So I'll leave you with that. I'm going to turn it over to Barbara Finkel, who's going to monitor the chats and people who's have hands up and whatnot, so that Dr. Hammerschlag can answer questions.
Okay, thank you. That was fascinating. I have a question of my own, but I'll first call on Lillian and then Marion. So Lillian is asking, what fish are vegetarian? Is tilapia a ground feeder? So I will admit that I don't know. Are you saying that vegetarian and ground feeder are the same thing? Because I don't even know that much. So
no, I'm not. The 2
Okay.
separate questions.
okay.
So that's an excellent question. And the answer is, so tilapia great choice. So tilapia is one of the most sustainable fish that you can eat because it is vegetarian. And then I would say things that are ground or bottom feeders are things that are definitely sustainable because they're eating close to, like, basically what they're eating is probably invertebrates. So we obviously can't eat invertebrates, but we can eat things that eat invertebrates. So I would say things that eat invertebrates are good to eat. So tilapia, and tilapia is actually very healthy. I don't know why anyone would say it's not healthy to eat tilapia. I think the only thing I would say is tilapia is less fatty than like salmon, which, you know, so the salmon's got good like omega-3s and omega-6s, which probably tilapia might have a little less of, but it's not unhealthy to eat tilapia. It's an excellent source of protein. So if you like tilapia, that's probably the best fish that you can eat.
I've heard that it's a ground feeder, that it eats other fish's waste products.
I'm not sure about that, but even if it did, it doesn't make it unhealthy, but I don't think that's true.
Okay, thank you. Marion.
And this, I'm putting
Yes.
the chat in the Seafood Watch Guide so that you can have a look
Oh,
at it.
great, thank you.
I was going to ask you the different fish that were sustainable, but I think you've partially answered that. But I was curious to know, since the tiger shark seems to do well in warm waters, if you're going to Nova Scotia, are you going to be investigating different types of sharks there? Because the water there would be quite cold, wouldn't it?
Yeah. So that is absolutely true. Well, I'm going to continue to investigate stuff outside, like but you know, the tiger sharks are coming up this way. They're following me, so we might be seeing them off of Nova Scotia soon, because of the water is warming here too. But yeah, some of the colder water species like blue sharks, poor beagle sharks, and great white sharks are off Nova Scotia, which I do intend to study.
Yeah, the other thing, I just wanted to ask one more. When you were talking about land against sea, that it's hard to just see, what happened to those little submarines that you used to see running around the ocean that were going down and investigating? Are those still not are they not being used, or?
Well, submarines are being used, but the thing is that it's very limited in scope, right? There's very limited in scope of where the scale of which you can investigate. You know, those submarines go down for very short amounts of time, and it takes a huge crew and a pilot and, you know, millions of dollars to have a mission. And the ocean's extremely big, right? The average depth in the ocean is like 4 kilometers deep. And so, you know, going in a little submarine at one spot, you know, in the ocean is almost, you know, it's almost meaningless. You know, there's just so much ocean out there.
So my question, that's a great lead into my question, which was, I guess my ultimate question is, where does the money come from? But I'm also interested, you didn't talk about, you know, how much of what you do is government initiated versus, you know, private, and how much of it is just in the US and how much of it is worldwide, and, you know, what kind of collaboration is there with other countries? And just, I know that's a lot, but anything you could say about that?
Yeah, so I mean, some of the work not the work I presented, but I do work that is government funded. So government funded work generally is focused on government priorities. And so, you know, what the government will do is say, you know, here's some priority, you know, release what they'll call as a call for applications. They'll say, you know, this is a priority for us to find out the answer to this. And then various scientists all over will try to compete for that money and put proposals together to try to be the ones that are chosen to do that work. So those and the government ones can be challenging because they're it's obviously taxpayer money that goes into that, so they tend to be less risky in terms of the science that they're doing. They're it's and but they're more money for the projects, but it's less creative in terms of what you can try to do. Where I get I get a little bit of government money. Where I get most of my funding from is foundations that are like conservation foundations that want to support ocean conservation initiatives, or and so those are ones that those are ones that I've historically written proposals to and got funded by, or just philanthropy. So through giving talks like this or social media or whatnot, people find out about our work and want to make a donation. So those are really the biggest ways. And I do have, I think collaboration is really key, and we do have global collaborations. I mean, I have projects myself, Florida, South Africa, the Galapagos, places in Australia, Bahamas, but even for my projects that might be local, I have collaborators based on their expertise that help me. So, basically every one of these projects usually have a team of people that have different skills, and those skills might be from people that are coming from different areas of the world as well. So a lot of this is very collaborative, and so yeah, and getting money is always an issue. I think that's and yeah, that's always a hindrance of what you can do. That's the biggest. If anyone says what's your biggest challenge, I would say getting sufficient funding to do what you want to do or what needs to be done, for sure.
Yeah. Is there agreement among experts like you on what the priorities are, or is even that
No, I mean, there is there's definitely an agreement. Yeah, there's definitely like certain topics that are, like the impacts of climate change, or how to reduce bycatch, that unintentional catch.
Mhm.
Those are some big topics for sure.
Yeah. Okay, let's let Myra ask question.
Hi, Dr. Hammerschlag. Thanks for this great, interesting presentation and doing such cool work, and all the international connections involved must be really exciting. So I have two questions. One is, you talked a lot about the tracking and the climate change effects on the migration and so forth, but is there any way to track the populations of the sharks that you study?
The individuals themselves?
No, like how many are there? Are they really, how much is all these changes in the climate and pollution affecting their numbers?
So that's a great question, and that's really hard to know, because first of all, most studies are relatively short in duration. Because we talked about funding. Usually the funding is like a 2-year funding, so it's really hard to look over. If you're very lucky, it might be 4 years of funding. So it's very hard to look over very long timescales to begin with. The second of all, the other big problem is because everything's invisible under the ocean, and a lot of changes have happened before we knew they happened. So when it was time for us to go look for them, it was that we didn't have a baseline. So that's the other big problem. Like when we realized that the oceans were overfished, when we realized overfishing was a problem, the oceans were already overfished. When we knew climate change was an issue, there already been climate change impacts. It wasn't like we were like, oh, plastic's going to be an issue, let's start watching to see what happens with it was like, uh-oh, now we have huge amounts of plastic waste, we should probably figure out what's the problem, what's the impact. So the problem is there's a huge lack of baseline data, which is always an issue. And lastly, the biggest issue, which you touched on, is we can't count. It's very tough to count to know the total population size in the oceans or lakes or rivers, because these animals move very large areas, and you can't you can't fly an airplane over and just count the numbers that are there. So the way historically, and what most people do is you will take a sample. So what you do is at 2 time points or 2 locations where you might say, go out, and often when it comes to marine biology, you do it through fishing. So for example, what people, the largest data sets that exist are from fishing boats, big commercial fishing boats. So what scientists generally do is they'll look at the information that fishing boats from 10 years ago, 20 years ago, compared to now. So how many fish did they catch? So on a one day, on one line, how many fish did they used to catch 50 years ago versus now? And what you don't know how many fish there were, but you can see how many there's a change. So for example, let's say 50 years ago, if you put out 10 lines, 10 fishing hooks, and you'd catch 10 fish. If today you put out 10 fishing lines and caught 1 fish, the population has gone down by 90%, because the change there's a 90% decrease. But you don't know how many there were to start, and you don't know how many there are after. You just can say that this has gone down by this much. So the relative change. So most of the stuff we know is looking at relative change, because we don't know how many there were to start and how many there are now. But you can say, okay, based on the records of how many we used to catch and how many we're catching now, this is the trajectory. It's been this much of a decline or this much of a change.
Got it. So my second question is kind of crazy. I read this really wild article either yesterday or the day before about, I believe it was a tour boat off of Florida. I don't know if you heard about this, where they cut the fishing lines and got into big trouble. And I didn't even realize that shark fishing was something that was happening. So I don't know if you can make any comments on that.
I can. I actually know about that really well. I'm friends with the people that got in trouble. It's actually a very sad story to me. I mean, to me, it's a very disappointing story. So there's a tour boat that goes in and they take people out to dive with sharks. They feed the sharks. They go offshore. They use bait. They feed sharks. They bring the sharks into divers. Divers get to swim with it. I've done this myself many, many times, the way I like to go dive and see the sharks. So they're coming back from a trip and they found a long line. Remember that long line? I showed the picture so they found one of those floating. It was 3 miles of long line with thousands and thousands of hooks, and it had all these sharks dangling on these hooks. And there's no boat like watching it, right? It was just this long line, and it had protected species, endangered species on the line. And so what they did is they called the government and said, there's an abandoned line here. And they mean by abandoned line that there's no one watching it. There's no one tending the line. And they also thought it was illegal in Florida. So they said, we found this illegal line. Can we release the sharks from the line and bring in the line? And they said, yeah, the officials that they spoke to. So they released all the sharks from the line, and they brought in the fishing line and brought it back to shore. But the problem was that, unfortunately, this was a kind of a government funded project. So because it's very unpopular to give people permits to go kill sharks, the government has to give permits for people to go kill sharks in the US, to do it, but without saying that they're giving. Basically, one of the things that they do is they work with fishermen, where they provide permits to go and catch these sharks, but the fishermen have to give data to the scientists. So basically, it's a way that the scientists can monitor what the population is doing. I told you, it's how many you used to catch to how much you catch now. Mm-hmm. And because scientists don't have a lot of money to go out and do that, they rely on other fishing vessels. So basically, the government is giving permits to these fishermen to go out and catch these sharks, and they keep them and they can sell them as long as they give the catch data, the information to the scientists, the government scientists. So unfortunately, it was one of these government permitted activities. So they got, from my understanding is that, from reading the article, that, that they got in a lot of trouble because, this was considered government property, I believe, from just what I've read. And the other issue is that the other issue is the buoy was marked with the boat's name. So they're saying that, listen, it was clearly marked that someone owned this. It wasn't abandoned. But I think, if I came across a line that wasn't being tended by anyone and was, so, they thought it was abandoned, I guess. And unfortunately, they are being convicted as felons with facing up to 5 years in jail and a $250,000 fine.
Thank you for explaining. That article was so confusing to me, and now I sort of understand it, except for the fact that they did ask permission. And so what agency actually gave them permission?
Well, no one gave, from my understanding that, they weren't, I guess, whoever they called, they didn't say, oh, that there was a boat. I guess, I don't know the details from what I read. It says they called, but, it says that they may not have told them that the boat number and the type of gear. It may have inaccurately, the article says that they inaccurately described the gear that was there. But certainly from, my understanding is that they thought it wasn't being tended, but, clearly no one was watching it, but so they didn't know. And they're obviously trying to release the sharks on the line that were going to be dead and caught. And so that's what they were trying to do. But unfortunately, they came across the wrong line because, it was obviously being used for not only fishing, but the data would support government research. So it's a pretty hefty penalty, though.
But the fine has to do with the cost of those fish that they released. That's where most of the fines seem to be coming from, like the sharks.
The gear itself cost $1,300. That was broken, dismantled, and they said the cost of the fish of the sharks would have been thousands of dollars. That's all they said. Now, thousands of dollars worth of fish lost is not the same thing as $250,000 fine, and it's certainly not the same thing as 5 years in prison and being a felony.
Thank you so much.
Wow, I hate to end on such a bad note, but I think it's time. Limor, did you want to say something? Wow, thank you so much.
One thing that Neil hit on is climate change, and that is actually the next topic that the Environmental Committee is going to be hitting. So thanks, Neil, for foreshadowing that and overlapping it with water, which is a great segue. And you'll be seeing more about that. I think our next program's in March, and you'll be seeing a little bit more about that. So I want to thank Dr. Hammerschlag. This was fascinating, so educational. I think I learned more in this hour than many, many hours I've spent on Zoom. And I want to thank Corinne, my co-chair, for helping arrange all of this. And as we know, never would have been possible without you for any of it. So that was great. And thank you, Debbie, for your technical advice. And thank you so much, Isabel, for being our producer tonight. But I'll let everybody go because it's a little bit after 9. And I promise to end at 9. But again, thank you for Dr. Hammerschlag for making the time for us. Corinne, did you want to say anything else before we hang up?
I'll just end with a really funny thought. If there's a shark that comes anywhere near where people are swimming, you hear shark and everyone runs out the water, and you'll see Neil running into the water. So I always think that's quite a funny thought. So I'll leave it at that.